The air was crisp, the kind of cold that made you zip your jacket all the way up and pull your scarf tighter as you walked down the quiet suburban street. It was a typical autumn evening in the small town of Ravenbrook, but something about this day felt different. Emma, a 23-year-old graphic designer, had just wrapped up a long day of work and was looking forward to a quiet evening at home. Little did she know, her life was about to change forever. She unlocked the door to her apartment, letting the familiar scent of lavender and fresh coffee beans greet her as she stepped inside. Her cat, Jasper, brushed against her legs as she bent down to pet him, grateful for the comfort of her small but cozy living space. Emma had always been a solitary person, enjoying the quiet solitude of her apartment, her art, and the occasional evening out with friends. But tonight, as she set her things down and prepared to settle in with a cup of tea, there was a knock at the door. It was an unusual hour for visitors, and Emma hesitated before answering. When she opened the door, there was no one in sight, just a large, cream-colored envelope resting on the welcome mat. It was unmarked, save for her name written in elegant, cursive handwriting on the front. A chill ran down her spine as she bent to pick it up, the weight of the envelope surprising her. Inside, she found a folded piece of thick parchment paper. The invitation was embossed with gold, elegant letters spelling out a name that caused her heart to skip a beat. Ravenswood Mansion. Emma, you are cordially invited to a private reunion at Ravenswood Mansion on the evening of Friday, November 5th. Please join us for an unforgettable evening of rekindling old memories and making new ones. The mansion has been waiting for your return. RSVP required. Her fingers trembled slightly as she read the words, Ravenswood Mansion. The name alone stirred something in her mind, a foggy memory of something she'd once heard in passing, a whisper of a place long abandoned. But what was this about a return? She had never been to Ravenswood, let alone knew anyone who had. Was it a mistake? A mix-up? Curiosity began to grow within her, though a sense of unease gnawed at the back of her mind. Emma had always been a skeptic when it came to these kinds of things. Mysterious invitations, especially to places she didn't recognize, were usually signs of a prank. She could have easily tossed the invitation aside and gone about her evening. But something about the words, "The mansion has been waiting for your return," hooked her in. She stared at the invitation for a moment longer before shaking her head, wondering if this was a joke or a poorly executed marketing stunt. Perhaps it was a surprise reunion from an old friend, someone who thought it would be fun to bring people together at a spooky mansion for the thrill of it. Either way, it was harmless. She decided to text her best friend Megan to share the bizarre invitation. As her fingers hovered over the keys, Emma hesitated. What if it was something more? What if it wasn't a prank? Her phone buzzed just then, a message from Megan popping up on the screen. "Did you get an invite to that Ravenswood thing too? Sounds like some kind of haunted house event. I heard there's an old history with that place. Weird." That did little to ease Emma's nerves. Haunted house event. Ravenswood was an actual mansion, one that stood at the edge of town for as long as anyone could remember. It was old, imposing, with a tall iron gate that was locked up tight most of the time. The stories surrounding it were whispered among town residents, stories of tragedy, loss, and inexplicable disappearances. Megan continued, "I've never been there, but it sounds like something that would be fun, right? Maybe it's a themed reunion or a spooky weekend retreat." Emma read the message but didn't respond right away. Her mind raced with questions, the memories of the mansion coming into sharper focus. It wasn't just the stories. She felt an odd connection to the place, a sense that she should go. Why? She didn't know. Maybe it was the allure of something unknown, or maybe it was the peculiar feeling of being chosen for something bigger than herself. Later that evening, Emma sat at her desk, the invitation still in front of her. She'd put off the decision, but curiosity tugged at her like an invisible thread. Maybe I'll just go for a few hours, she thought aloud, staring at the invitation. What's the worst that could happen? She picked up her phone and texted Megan, "I think I'll check it out, why not?" A few seconds later, Megan's reply came, "You're braver than I am, but hey, have fun. Take pictures if you can." Emma chuckled at her friend's response but still felt an uneasy knot in her stomach. She glanced at the clock on the wall. It was getting late. She didn't know what time the event started, but she was already committed now. The next evening, Emma found herself driving through Ravenbrook's winding roads, toward the mansion that seemed to grow larger as she approached. The closer she got, the heavier the atmosphere seemed to become. The woods surrounding the mansion cast long, eerie shadows, and the sound of her tires on the gravel road grew deafening in the quiet of the evening. The mansion itself was visible now, its Gothic spires and looming windows standing tall against the darkening sky. A light fog had begun to settle over the area, wrapping the mansion in an air of mystery. As Emma pulled into the long, winding driveway, the front gates creaked open before her, as if the mansion were welcoming her in. She parked near the front steps and took a deep breath. Despite her reservations, she found herself walking toward the heavy wooden door. The invitation in her hand felt warm, almost as if it were alive in her grip. The door opened before she could knock. Standing in the doorway was a man, tall, with piercing blue eyes and dark hair. He was dressed in a black suit with a silver pocket watch hanging from his vest. "Welcome to Ravenswood," he said, his voice smooth yet unsettlingly familiar. Before Emma could respond, he stepped aside, motioning for her to enter. Something in his gaze made her hesitate, but only for a moment. She stepped across the threshold, unaware that this was the beginning of a night that would change everything. As Emma crossed the threshold of Ravenswood Mansion, a cold draft brushed against her skin. The door closed behind her with a heavy thud, and she felt the weight of the place settle around her. The entrance hall was grand but dimly lit. High ceilings towered above, lined with ornate woodwork and grand chandeliers that seemed to loom like silent sentinels. Dust motes danced in the faint light that filtered through the towering windows, casting long, crooked shadows on the floor. The air smelled of old wood, candle wax, and something else, something faintly metallic. "Come in, come in. We've been waiting for you," the man who had greeted her said. He motioned for her to step further into the mansion. His eyes, still as piercing as before, seemed to scan her every movement. "I'm sorry," Emma said, hesitating. "I didn't expect it to be so grand." The man smiled, a tight, almost artificial expression, before answering. "Ravenswood has a history, my dear. It tends to overwhelm those who aren't prepared." Emma wasn't sure what he meant by that, but the way his eyes glinted unnerved her. She could feel his gaze lingering, as though he were sizing her up, trying to see beyond her skin, beyond her thoughts. "Allow me to take your coat," he said, stepping forward and gently reaching for the jacket she had yet to remove. As he touched the fabric, she felt a shiver run down her spine. Without waiting for her response, he turned and walked toward a set of grand double doors at the end of the hallway. She followed him cautiously, unsure of what to expect. A strange sense of anticipation hung in the air, thick and unnerving like a storm waiting to break. As Emma entered the room, the first thing she noticed was the number of people gathered. There were at least a dozen others, most of them standing in small groups, speaking in low tones. Everyone was dressed impeccably, formal attire that seemed out of place for a casual reunion. There were men in tuxedos, women in long gowns, their expressions a mix of curiosity and intrigue. Each person's face seemed to be familiar but not quite. Emma was certain she had never met any of them, yet there was an odd sense of déjà vu in the air, as if they were all part of a forgotten story. The host, whom Emma had not yet learned the name of, moved to the center of the room, and the guests immediately quieted. He was tall and thin, his dark suit blending seamlessly with the shadows. He turned slowly to face everyone, his lips curling into an unsettling smile. "Welcome to Ravenswood, my dear guests," he said. His voice was smooth, almost hypnotic, and Emma felt herself drawn to it, though she wasn't entirely sure why. "We are all here for one reason. We are here to remember what we have forgotten, to rediscover something that has been buried for far too long." He glanced around the room, his eyes gleaming as if searching for a reaction. "What we are about to experience will not be what you expect. But then again, none of us ever truly know what we expect, do we?" A heavy silence followed his words. The guests exchanged glances, and Emma, feeling out of place, crossed her arms over her chest, trying to find something to hold on to. Her heart began to race again. There was something so strange about the way the host spoke, almost as though he was speaking in riddles, drawing her in without her even realizing it. The host gestured toward a grand staircase, the elegant, curved banister leading upward to the shadowed second floor. "Please, take your time, mingle, and let the mansion reveal itself to you. The evening is young and we have many things to rediscover, but remember, what is hidden must be seen, and what is forgotten must be remembered." With that, the guests began to disperse. Emma lingered near the back of the room, feeling strangely isolated despite the crowd. She wasn't sure why, but she could not shake the feeling that the mansion was watching her. The flickering candlelight, the soft rustling of the curtains in the cold breeze, everything about the place felt alive, as though it were breathing. She moved toward a group of people who were gathered around an old fireplace, which crackled with a gentle flame. As she approached, a tall woman in a long velvet gown looked up, her eyes wide with curiosity. "You look new," the woman said with a faint smile. "You're one of the latecomers, aren't you?" Emma nodded, feeling awkward. "Yes, I didn't realize the event would be like this." The woman chuckled softly. "Ravenswood is always like this. It has a way of drawing people in even if they don't understand why. But don't worry, by the end of the evening everything will make sense. You'll see." Emma blinked, unsure of how to respond. "I'm sorry, but what exactly is this all about? The invitation?" "Ah," the woman interrupted, her voice dropping to a hushed tone. "That's a question no one can answer until it's too late." Before Emma could ask more, the woman turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. Emma stood there, watching the guests as they mingled. She could feel her unease growing, and the flickering shadows cast by the candles only seemed to heighten the tension. She didn't want to admit it, but there was a nagging feeling inside her that something was wrong. Something wasn't right about the evening. A sound behind her made her jump, a soft, almost imperceptible whisper. "Welcome back," a voice said from the shadows. Emma turned to see the host standing just behind her, his face more sinister in the dim light. "You'll find that Ravenswood always keeps its promises, even the ones we didn't make. Emma's breath caught in her throat, and for the first time that evening she felt the weight of something oppressive hanging over her. Her hands trembled as she gripped her glass of wine, but the moment passed, and the host was gone, slipping back into the crowd like a shadow. The evening wore on, but the sense of unease refused to lift. As the clock ticked on, Emma felt the mansion close in around her, its walls echoing with the whispers of forgotten stories. She noticed the guests behaving oddly, some of them laughing, others staring at nothing in particular, their eyes glazed over. The once lively conversation now felt strained, hollow. The mansion itself seemed to shift, the temperature fluctuating, the floorboards creaking as though it were alive. Emma found herself moving deeper into the mansion, her footsteps echoing as she passed dark hallways and grand, silent rooms. When she reached a narrow hallway at the back of the house, she paused. There at the end stood an old portrait, its frame ornate and grand. The painting was of a man who looked eerily familiar. His sharp features, cold eyes, he was the host, or at least someone who looked like him. Emma's pulse quickened. Something was wrong, this place, these people, the atmosphere. It all felt like a nightmare wrapped in velvet and gold. And as she stared at the painting, she realized one terrifying truth. She wasn't just a guest here. She had been invited for a reason. The evening dragged on, and the oppressive weight of Ravenswood Mansion seemed to grow with each passing minute. Emma, having lost sight of the host and most of the other guests, found herself wandering through the mansion's sprawling hallways, drawn to the eerie silence that had settled over the once joyful crowd. She had the unsettling sense that someone, or something, was watching her, though no one seemed to be around. It was in one of these quiet moments, as she meandered past a set of heavy wooden doors that led to what appeared to be the mansion's library, that she overheard the voices. Soft and muffled, the conversation came from the other side of the room. It sounded like two people, their words just barely audible. Emma hesitated, drawn in by the strange and familiar tone of the conversation. She pressed herself against the wall, straining to catch the words. "Do you think she'll be the one?" a woman's voice asked, barely above a whisper. "I don't know," another voice, deeper and filled with an unsettling calm, replied. "But she's been chosen. They always are. The mansion knows." Emma's heart skipped a beat, and she instinctively moved closer to the doorway. The voice that spoke last was too familiar. It was the same voice that had greeted her when she first entered Ravenswood, the host's voice. She pressed herself harder against the wall, trying to remain unseen, her breath shallow as she listened. The woman's voice spoke again, now tinged with apprehension. "But the others, the ones who disappeared, they were never the same, were they? You said they forgot everything, they forgot us." The man's voice was calm, too calm, as if he were trying to reassure the woman or perhaps trying to convince himself. "They weren't meant to remember. The mansion takes what it needs, and when it's done, it lets them go. They return, and yet they don't." Emma felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. She had heard that last phrase before. Hadn't someone mentioned it earlier that evening? She couldn't quite place who, but the words felt too familiar to be a coincidence. They returned, but they didn't. It was as if Ravenswood had swallowed pieces of those who had come before her and left only the shells of who they were. She leaned in even closer, her fingers gripping the edge of the doorframe for balance, her heart hammering in her chest. The man continued, his voice dark and laced with something sinister. "They always come back, but by then they're no longer the same. We were once like them, innocent, unaware. But Ravenswood has its own rules. It keeps what it wants and discards the rest. Emma's breath hitched. She needed to hear more, but fear was beginning to rise in her chest. The mansion felt alive. Its walls, its doors, its corridors were all whispering secrets, and now they had caught her in their web. She stepped back, retreating quietly into the shadows, but she had learned enough. Ravenswood had a history, and that history was tied to the people who vanished, to those who were taken by the mansion. Her mind was racing as she made her way back down the hallway, her footsteps muffled by the heavy carpet. She passed a tall mirror, the kind that could be found in any large mansion, and her reflection caught her eye. She stopped and looked at herself for a moment. Her features were pale, her eyes wide with confusion and fear. How had she gotten herself into this? What was this place, really? And why had she been invited? She glanced over her shoulder, half expecting to see someone standing behind her, but the hallway was empty. A low creaking sound echoed from somewhere in the distance, and she turned back to the mirror, her heart skipping a beat. In the reflection, she saw the figure of a man standing just behind her. Emma spun around in an instant, but the hallway was empty. Her breathing quickened, and her pulse pounded in her ears. She could feel the presence of something, a shadow that lingered just outside of her line of sight, moving silently as if it were waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. After several long moments of standing still, trying to steady her breath, Emma shook off the feeling of being watched. She couldn't afford to let fear control her now. The whispers had stirred something inside her, a sense that Ravenswood wasn't just a place of grand rooms and shadowy corners. It was a place where something darker lingered, something that had been feeding on the very souls of those who dared to enter. As Emma moved away from the mirror, her mind continued to replay the words she had overheard. The mansion had a history of people who vanished, forgotten by the world, but not by the mansion. She had been chosen, just as the others had. But what would happen to her? Would she, too, disappear like the others? Would she return, only to find that something inside her had changed? The thought gnawed at her as she walked deeper into the mansion. The air seemed heavier now, thick with an almost tangible dread. And then, as if on cue, a door creaked open and she was drawn toward it, compelled somehow to see what lay beyond. Through the doorway, Emma could see the flickering of candlelight, the soft glow illuminating the walls of an old study. Dust covered the furniture and bookshelves lined the room, their spines faded with age. A large desk stood in the center, papers scattered across it, and in the far corner, an ornate mirror reflected the dim light, casting a ghostly glow across the room. Emma's heart raced, but she found herself stepping inside, her feet carrying her further toward the mystery. As she approached the desk, she noticed something strange, a photograph resting on the papers. She picked it up and examined it closely. The image was old, the edges yellowed with age, but what stood out was the family in the picture. They were all smiling, but there was something off about the way they looked, something in their eyes that seemed distant, hollow. Her breath caught in her throat as she realized something that made her stomach drop. The man in the picture was standing at the edge of the frame, looking out at her. He was the same man who had greeted her earlier that evening, the same one who had invited her here. And his smile, it was exactly the same smile he had given her when they first met. Emma turned sharply, looking around the study as the shadows seemed to grow longer and darker, stretching across the walls like fingers reaching toward her. The room was silent, save for the sound of her own breathing. She needed to get out of there. But before she could take another step, she heard a faint whisper behind her, a soft, almost inaudible sound. "You've seen too much, Emma." Her heart pounded in her chest as the whisper faded into the distance. Emma's blood ran cold. She wasn't alone, and she realized then Ravenswood had been waiting for her, just as it had waited for all the others. The unsettling whispers still echoed in Emma's mind as she made her way down the grand corridor. Her thoughts raced, and the faint sound of footsteps in the distance only added to her growing sense of dread. She needed answers, needed to understand the history of this place. The eerie atmosphere of Ravenswood Mansion pressed in on her from all sides, but there was something almost magnetic about the ancient structure, as if the mansion itself was calling her deeper into its dark heart. Her feet brought her to the large oak doors of the mansion's library. The doors creaked as she pushed them open, the sound sending a shiver down her spine. The air inside was thick with the scent of old paper, dust, and something faintly metallic. The room was dim, lit only by the soft glow of flickering candlelight. Rows upon rows of bookshelves lined the walls, laden with leather-bound volumes and fragile scrolls, their titles obscured by time and neglect. Emma stepped inside, the quiet creaking of the wooden floorboards beneath her feet the only sound. Her hand brushed across the spines of the books as she wandered further into the room, her fingers trailing over the smooth surface of the ancient wood. It was the kind of place where history seemed to seep from every corner, a place where secrets had been locked away for generations. The shelves towered above her, their contents a labyrinth of forgotten stories. She could feel the weight of the past pressing in on her, each book a silent witness to the mansion's dark history. It wasn't until she reached the farthest corner of the room that she found what she was looking for, a dusty, leather-bound journal lying abandoned on a wooden table. She hesitated for a moment before picking it up. The cover was cracked and faded, the edges worn from years of neglect. The pages inside were yellowed, and the ink had bled slightly with age. As Emma flipped through the pages, she was struck by the neat, precise handwriting, each word written with a deliberate care that seemed out of place in the chaotic surroundings. She began to read, her eyes scanning the words that detailed the mansion's dark past. September 12, 1865. I can hear it again. The whispering. It calls to me from the walls, from the very foundation of Ravenswood. It has been a year since we arrived, but the house has never felt like home. It feels more like a prison, and I am its prisoner. The others do not understand, do not hear the whispers that haunt this place. I think they are becoming something else. Something changed in them the moment we crossed the threshold of Ravenswood, and now they walk like shadows lost to the mansion's will. I fear it is already too late. I have seen their eyes, empty and hollow, like those of the previous inhabitants of this cursed place. They speak of the mansion's gift, the promise it makes to those who enter its doors, but I know better. There is no gift here, only loss, only death. Emma's breath caught in her throat as she read on. The journal belonged to someone who had lived in Ravenswood long before her, someone who had witnessed the mansion's power firsthand. The mention of the gift, and the way the previous inhabitants had been consumed by the mansion, sent a chill down her spine. It was as though the mansion had a life of its own, a force that preyed on the souls of those who dared to enter. October 2, 1865. It has taken my husband. I thought I could escape it, but it found him. I found him last night standing in front of the mirror, staring at his own reflection with eyes that were not his own. His expression was blank, empty, like a stranger wearing his face. I tried to speak to him, but he didn't respond. He hasn't spoken a word since. It calls to him, too. I hear it now. Its whispers are louder, more persistent. They come from the walls, from the floors. It is the mansion. It wants us. It has taken so many before us, and now it wants him. He is already gone, even though his body remains here. I am certain of it. Ravenswood has claimed him. Emma felt her stomach drop as she read the final entry, the ink smudging on the paper as though the writer had been overcome with emotion. The mansion, it seemed, had a sinister way of feeding on its inhabitants, twisting them into something unrecognizable, something that was no longer truly human. The thought that this could happen to her, could happen to anyone who entered, was almost too much to bear. Suddenly, a cold wind blew through the library, ruffling the pages of the journal and sending a shiver through Emma's body. She slammed the book shut, the sound echoing through the room. Her heart was pounding in her chest, and the air around her felt thick, oppressive. She felt as though the mansion itself was watching her, its eyes hidden in the shadows, waiting for her to make her move. Emma stepped back from the table, her mind racing. The journal had given her a glimpse into the mansion's twisted history, but it was only the beginning. The more she learned, the more she realized that she had stumbled into something far darker than she could have imagined. Just as she was about to leave the library, she noticed something strange. The bookshelf closest to her, which had once been lined with books, now appeared to be moving. The books shifted and trembled, their pages fluttering as if caught in an unseen breeze. Emma's breath caught in her throat. The entire bookshelf seemed to sway as though it were alive. Without thinking, she reached out to steady it. But as her hand made contact with the shelf, it swung open with a creak, revealing a hidden passage behind it. The darkness within the passage seemed to pull her in, a cold, empty void that seemed to promise more secrets, secrets that she was not yet ready to face. But Emma knew one thing for sure. She was not going to turn back now. She took a deep breath and stepped forward into the unknown, ready to uncover the mansion's darkest secrets. The soft flicker of candlelight cast eerie shadows against the walls of the mansion as Sarah ventured further into its secrets. Her mind raced with the revelations from the library. The journal's pages now burned into her memory. The mansion, Ravenswood, was not merely old and haunted. It was alive with memories of its dark past, memories that the mansion did not want to let go. The hidden passage from the library had led her to a dark hallway, one that twisted and turned in a way that suggested the house had been built to keep secrets, an intricate maze of corridors and rooms that all led to nowhere. But Sarah was not one to back down from a mystery. She had already felt the strange pull of the mansion, as if it was beckoning her to uncover the truth. And truth, it seemed, could only be found in its darkest corners. The hallway was narrow, the walls adorned with portraits of long-dead aristocrats, their eyes following her every move. The faint scent of mold and decay hung in the air, mingling with the dust of centuries past. As Sarah pressed on, her hand brushed against the wallpaper, rough and uneven, as if hiding something beneath. She turned a corner and found herself standing before a door she had not noticed before. It was small, unmarked, and inconspicuous, tucked away at the very end of the hallway. Her heart skipped a beat, and she hesitated for a moment. The door seemed to throb with a strange energy, as though it held something crucial, something she was meant to find. Her hand trembled as she reached for the handle, the metal cold beneath her fingertips. She turned it slowly, the door creaking open with a sound that echoed down the empty hallway. What she saw on the other side made her blood run cold. The forgotten lane stretched before her, a narrow, overgrown path that snaked through the wild, untamed garden that surrounded the mansion. Thick vines and weeds had claimed the area, but even beneath the tangled growth, she could see the faint remnants of cobblestones. The lane seemed to beckon her forward, and Sarah stepped into the shadow of the trees that lined its edges. As she walked, her boots crunching against the gravel, the air grew heavier, the silence more oppressive. The mansion loomed behind her like a distant, watchful presence. She felt as though the house was holding its breath, waiting for her to uncover the truth. The forgotten lane led her deeper into the grounds, winding its way through a grove of ancient trees that seemed to whisper as the wind rustled through their leaves. The trees were old, far older than anything she had seen before, and their twisted branches seemed to reach down like fingers, casting dark, foreboding shadows over the path. Sarah's eyes were drawn to something half buried beneath the roots of one of the trees. She knelt down, brushing away the leaves and dirt, and uncovered an old, weathered box. It was small, made of dark wood, and had intricate carvings along its sides. The box seemed strangely familiar, as though it had been waiting for her to find it. With trembling hands, she pried open the lid. Inside, there were several items, trinkets, jewelry, and old letters, all yellowed with age. But one item caught her attention more than the others, a small, tarnished key. It glinted in the dim light as if calling to her. She picked it up, feeling a sudden chill run through her. The key was oddly cold to the touch, its metal worn but sturdy. It seemed to pulse with a strange energy, as though it held the answer to a question she hadn't even asked yet. As Sarah stood, clutching the key in her hand, a faint sound reached her ears, soft footsteps like a whisper of movement behind her. She spun around, but the lane was empty. The trees swayed gently in the breeze, their branches creaking in the stillness. She felt a prickling sensation at the back of her neck. The air felt thick with something she couldn't quite place, a presence, a watchful eye, unseen but ever present. But she couldn't let fear stop her now. She had come too far. With the key in her hand, Sarah continued down the forgotten lane, her footsteps echoing in the silence. As she moved deeper into the garden, the trees began to grow denser, their branches intertwining above her head, forming a canopy that blocked out the moonlight. It felt as though the world had narrowed, leaving her with only the path ahead and the shadow of Ravenswood looming in the distance. After what felt like an eternity, Sarah came to a clearing. At the center of the clearing stood a stone structure, an old well, weathered by time, its surface covered in ivy and moss. The stones around the well were cracked and uneven, but there was something about the well that drew her in. It seemed to pulse with a strange energy, as if it had been waiting for someone to arrive. Sarah approached cautiously, her breath catching in her throat. The well's stone walls were covered in markings, symbols and runes that she didn't recognize but somehow felt she should. She knelt down and peered into the darkness of the well, but there was nothing inside, only blackness that seemed to stretch on forever. It was then that she saw it, a faint glimmer at the bottom of the well. Something shiny, something metallic. Her heart skipped a beat, and she instinctively reached for the key in her hand. The cold metal seemed to burn against her skin as if it knew its purpose. Without thinking, Sarah dropped to her knees and began to clear away the debris around the well, her hands shaking as she worked. The glimmer grew brighter, more distinct. She could see now that it was a lock, a rusted, ancient lock that seemed to be waiting for the key. She inserted the key into the lock with trembling fingers, turning it slowly. There was a soft click, and the well seemed to exhale a deep sigh, as though it had been holding its breath for centuries. As the lock released, Sarah hesitated for a moment, unsure of what would happen next, but her curiosity pushed her forward. She took a deep breath and lifted the lid of the well. The moment she did, the air around her seemed to shift. A gust of wind whipped through the clearing, the trees groaning as though they were alive. The ground beneath her feet seemed to tremble. And then a voice, low and distant, whispered from the depths of the well. It was a voice she recognized, a voice that chilled her to the bone. The wind howled through the trees as Sarah stood in the center of the forgotten garden, her breath heavy and her heart pounding with an insatiable curiosity. The moment she had unlocked the ancient well, the world around her had shifted, and the whispers of Ravenswood's dark history seemed to have drawn closer, as if the mansion itself had begun to reveal its deepest secrets. The air was thick with an oppressive silence as she turned to leave the clearing, the key still gripped tightly in her hand. The direction in which she moved seemed to pull her forward, as if the mansion was leading her towards something important. The journey through the garden had been long, but now she found herself in front of a structure she hadn't noticed before. The mausoleum stood before her, a looming and forgotten monument of stone. Overgrown ivy and vines covered its walls, and it appeared as though the building had been abandoned for decades, perhaps even centuries. But the faintly glowing light within suggested that it hadn't been completely forgotten, not by the mansion nor by the mysterious forces at play here. Instinctively, Sarah stepped forward, feeling a mixture of fear and determination stirring in her chest. Something about the mausoleum called to her, a magnetism that she could not explain. She reached out and touched the heavy, weathered door. To her surprise, it swung open with little effort, revealing the darkness beyond. The scent of damp stone filled the air as she stepped into the mausoleum. Her footsteps echoed off the cold, smooth walls, and the faint flicker of torchlight illuminated rows of ancient stone slabs and alcoves. But what caught Sarah's attention were the portraits, massive, gilded frames that lined the walls of the mausoleum. Faces stared back at her, their eyes dark and haunting, as though they had been waiting for her to arrive. Her breath caught in her throat as she stepped closer to one of the portraits. The first thing she noticed was the unmistakable family resemblance. It was Claire, the woman who had invited her to the reunion, the mysterious host of Ravenswood Mansion. Claire's face, youthful yet full of melancholy, was surrounded by the names and dates of the missing people. But there was something more chilling about the portrait. The deep sadness in Claire's eyes seemed to match the eerie stillness of the mansion. The resemblance between her and the others in the portraits was undeniable. These were the faces of the people who had disappeared, vanished without a trace, just as the whispers in the library had suggested. Sarah moved deeper into the mausoleum, her hands trembling as she studied each portrait. They were all members of the mansion's past, some dated centuries ago, others more recent. Each one was missing, their fate tied to the mansion in some way. And in the center of the largest portrait, Claire stood once again, this time much older, her eyes wide with terror, the unmistakable sense of dread that hung in the air now attaching itself to her likeness. It was impossible to ignore the growing realization that Claire was not simply a host for the reunion. She was part of the mansion's curse, just as much as the others. She was a part of its history, a history that had been carefully obscured from those who entered, keeping its darkest secrets hidden beneath layers of time and decay. As Sarah examined the portraits more closely, she realized there was something deeply unsettling about their placement. Each portrait was accompanied by a small plaque, a name etched in gold letters. But these names didn't belong to just anyone. They were people who had disappeared from Ravenswood and its surrounding towns, people who had been missing for years. Some, like Claire, had been part of the mansion's fabric for decades, and others had vanished under strange circumstances, never to be heard from again. The more Sarah read, the more she understood that these individuals were more than just missing. They were victims of something far more sinister. There were symbols next to the portraits, cryptic marks that she hadn't seen before, but somehow they seemed familiar. Sarah could feel her pulse quicken as she traced the symbols with her fingers. These were not just decorative, they were important. They connected the portraits to each other, forming an intricate web, a network of lives lost and forgotten. As her eyes scanned the walls, a pattern began to emerge. The names on the plaques seemed to connect to Claire, as though each missing person had once been close to her. They were her family, her friends, her guests, but each of them had met with a tragic end. And Claire's portrait was in the center, at the heart of it all. Something was terribly wrong. The reunion at Ravenswood, the seemingly innocent gathering that had lured her here, was not what it seemed. The mansion, the grounds, the people, it all seemed like one twisted, never-ending cycle of tragedy. These portraits weren't just memories, they were warnings. Warnings about what happened to those who dared to enter Ravenswood, to those who became part of the mansion's history. Sarah could no longer ignore the terrifying truth that had been hidden from her. The reunion wasn't just a celebration, it was a trap, a carefully orchestrated gathering of people whose fates had been sealed the moment they stepped foot in the mansion. Claire, the host, was part of this web, trapped just like the others who had disappeared before her. As she stepped back from the portraits, a sudden cold draft swept through the mausoleum, extinguishing the flames of the torches and plunging the room into darkness. Sarah's heart raced, and a sense of suffocating fear washed over her. She heard a faint, rustling sound behind her as though something or someone was moving in the shadows. She whirled around, but there was nothing there. The silence that followed was deafening. She wasn't alone. The portraits seemed to watch her, their eyes following her every movement. The eerie stillness of the mausoleum pressed down on her chest, the weight of the mansion's history crushing her. The whispers she had heard earlier, the ones that had led her to the mansion's deepest secrets, grew louder in her ears as if the very walls of Ravenswood were closing in around her. Suddenly, a voice echoed through the mausoleum, soft at first but growing stronger, more insistent. "Leave, before it's too late." Sarah froze, her breath catching in her throat. The voice was familiar, but it wasn't Claire's. It was a whisper, a warning, a plea. The walls seemed to pulse with the sound, as though the mansion itself was alive, speaking to her. Her mind raced. Should she leave? Should she escape while she still could? But something deep inside her told her she couldn't. The mansion had already claimed her, just as it had claimed all the others. Before she could move, the door to the mausoleum slammed shut with a deafening thud. The light flickered, then died, leaving her in complete darkness. The air seemed to thicken, pressing in on her from all sides, and the whispering voice grew louder. "Sarah." The name echoed in the stillness, a soft, haunting sound that seemed to come from the walls themselves. Sarah's heart raced as she stumbled backward, searching for the door, but it was too late. The mansion had already decided her fate. The weight of the mausoleum's dark secrets pressed heavily on Sarah's chest as she stumbled out of the shadows, her breath shallow and fast. She had seen too much, uncovered too many disturbing truths, and yet she couldn't shake the overwhelming sense of dread that clung to her. The walls of Ravenswood Mansion seemed to hum with life, whispering her name, urging her toward something or someone. Her legs carried her instinctively back toward the mansion's main hall, the same grand staircase she had climbed earlier, though now it felt like an entirely different place. The once beautiful walls, adorned with elaborate portraits, seemed to close in on her. The dim lighting and the sound of her shoes clicking against the marble floor were the only things breaking the eerie silence. But Sarah knew she wasn't truly alone. Not anymore. As she approached the study, where Claire had greeted her upon her arrival, a feeling of unease swirled in her gut. The moment she set foot in this place, she had felt the odd tension in the air, like something or someone was waiting. Now everything was starting to make sense, but none of it was comforting. The door creaked open slowly as Sarah entered, the dim light from the fireplace casting long shadows across the room. The familiar scent of leather-bound books and rich wood mixed with the faint smell of something damp, something decaying. Claire stood by the large bay window, looking out over the grounds, her posture rigid, as though she had been waiting for Sarah all along. "Sarah," Claire said without turning, her voice as smooth as silk, but it carried an edge, a layer of something dark beneath the calm exterior. "I knew you would come." Sarah swallowed hard, her heart pounding in her chest as she closed the distance between them. She had questions, so many questions, but one burned the brightest. "What is this place?" Sarah demanded, her voice trembling with both fear and anger. "What's happening here? Why were we brought here? The missing people, Claire, what is going on?" Claire turned to face her slowly, a sad, almost pitying look on her face. Her eyes, once filled with excitement and charm, now seemed hollow, distant. As she looked at Sarah, there was something in her gaze that felt ancient, like the weight of generations had settled into her very being. "It's a curse," Claire began, her voice soft but steady. "A curse that's been with Ravenswood for centuries. And now it's your turn." Sarah's stomach lurched at the words. "My turn." Claire nodded, her lips curling into a faint, mournful smile. She stepped closer to Sarah, her gaze never wavering. "The reunion, the gathering, it was never for fun. It's never been about reconnecting with the past. It's about something much darker. We invite people just like you, those who share a connection to Ravenswood, those whose lives have somehow been tied to the mansion's fate." Sarah felt her knees weaken, but she steadied herself, standing tall. "What do you mean? Why me? Why are you involved in this?" Claire's expression shifted, growing colder, as though a layer of her true self had finally emerged, something Sarah hadn't yet seen. "I wasn't always the way I am now. Once I was like you, a guest, a stranger with no knowledge of the mansion's curse. But now I'm bound to it. It chooses its victims, its guests, and it feeds on them, one by one. The mansion claims us all eventually." Sarah stared at her, unable to comprehend the full weight of Claire's words. "So, all of the people who disappeared, the ones in the portraits, they were all guests, all part of this twisted cycle." Claire's smile faded as she nodded slowly. "Yes. Every person who came to Ravenswood, every person who answered the invitation, became a part of its history, its curse. Each one vanished, either absorbed by the mansion or forced to remain, trapped in its walls forever, and the cycle continues. It always does." Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she felt a chill sweep through her body, a feeling of inevitability creeping up her spine. "What do you mean, trapped? Are you telling me that we'll never leave?" "The mansion won't let you go," Claire whispered. "Once you enter, once you become part of its story, you are bound to it, whether you want to be or not. You are already part of Ravenswood's history, Sarah, just like all the others. The curse is inescapable. The mansion chooses its victims, and they live within it forever." Sarah felt a surge of terror, a panic rising in her chest. She turned and backed away, her mind racing with disbelief. So this isn't a reunion at all, it's a trap. You brought us here to feed the mansion's hunger, Claire interrupted quietly. Yes, to keep the curse alive, to ensure its endless cycle of life and death. The mansion thrives on the souls of those it claims. It's a dark and twisted bargain that none of us can escape. Sarah's pulse quickened as she tried to take in everything Claire was saying. Her thoughts spiraled as she attempted to make sense of it all, but nothing added up. How could a place, a mansion, hold such power? How could something like this even exist? It seemed impossible, but as she stood in the heart of Ravenswood, surrounded by its haunted walls, it felt all too real. "Why are you telling me this?" Sarah asked, her voice shaking. "Why now? What do you want from me?" Claire's eyes softened as she stepped closer. "I'm telling you this because you must understand what's at stake. The curse cannot be broken, but you," she paused, her voice faltering for a moment. "You have a choice, Sarah, you always have." Sarah frowned, confused. "A choice?" Claire nodded. "You can join us, Sarah, become a part of Ravenswood as we all have, or you can fight it, but fighting comes at a cost, and you'll never leave. The mansion will ensure that." The air around Sarah grew heavy as the weight of Claire's words settled in her chest. Her mind raced, her instincts screaming at her to run, to escape before it was too late. But something deep inside her knew that running wouldn't help, not from this, not from Ravenswood. Sarah took a deep breath, her resolve hardening. "I won't join you. I won't let this place take me. There has to be another way." Claire's face softened into a sad, knowing expression. "You'll see, Sarah. You'll see that there is no other way. The mansion will claim you just like it claims all the others. In the end, we're all bound to it, all of us." Sarah turned away, determination rising within her. She couldn't give in. She wouldn't become another victim of Ravenswood, not like all the others who had come before her. With a deep breath, she stepped toward the door, the weight of the confrontation lingering in the air behind her. There was no going back, but Sarah had made her choice. The battle had only just begun. The walls of Ravenswood groaned, a low, unsettling sound that seemed to reverberate through the very air itself. Sarah stood in the center of the grand hall, her heart pounding in her chest as a strange, magnetic pull seemed to come from the deep core of the mansion. The air felt heavier, thick with an energy that she could neither comprehend nor escape. It was as though the mansion had awoken from a deep, endless slumber, and now it was aware of her presence, aware of her resistance. As the flickering candlelight cast long shadows across the room, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that the mansion was alive, watching her every move. The once grand rooms had grown colder, more oppressive. The portraits of former residents, once painted with warm hues and peaceful smiles, now seemed distorted, their eyes following her with a cold, knowing stare. The very atmosphere of the place had shifted, as if the house itself had begun to tighten its grip on her soul. She turned toward the front doors, hoping for an escape, but they were gone. In their place was an impenetrable wall of darkness. Her breath caught in her throat as she realized there was no way out, no simple exit that would lead her back to safety. She was trapped just like the others before her. Suddenly, the air around her thickened, growing unnaturally cold. A soft whisper echoed in her ears, barely audible but unmistakable. "Sarah, Sarah." Her spine stiffened as she instinctively spun around, but the hall was empty. The doors were still sealed tight. The whispers grew louder, this time filling her mind with a chaotic rush of voices, distant and hollow. "Sarah, we've been waiting for you." The voice was familiar yet alien, twisting into something unrecognizable. Panic surged through Sarah's veins, and she clutched at her chest, gasping for air. Her mind reeled as the mansion's presence seemed to grow even stronger, surrounding her, suffocating her thoughts. It was as if the walls themselves were breathing, pulling her deeper into its dark heart. Then, as if by some unseen force, Sarah's body moved of its own accord, dragging her through the hall toward the staircase. She tried to fight it, her mind screaming to stop, but her legs carried her upwards toward the second floor. The deeper she went into the mansion, the stronger the pull became. The house wanted her, needed her. It was as if it had recognized her, identified her as one of its own. The once glorious staircase creaked beneath her, each step more haunting than the last. The walls seemed to close in, narrowing around her as she ascended. She could feel the weight of the mansion pressing against her, the oppressive energy filling the space with an unbearable tension. The air smelled of decay and dust, but underneath it there was something else, something far more sinister. At the top of the stairs, Sarah turned toward the first door she saw, the library. She had to reach the library. She had to find answers, a way to escape. But as she reached for the doorknob, it twisted on its own, swinging open slowly. The creaking sound echoed through the empty hallway like a sinister invitation. Inside, the library had changed. The shelves that once held dusty old books now seemed to stretch on endlessly. The shelves stacked impossibly high, vanishing into a darkness that didn't belong. The fireplace flickered, casting an eerie glow across the room, its flames flickering unnaturally. As Sarah stepped inside, she felt a shiver run down her spine and a strange sensation filled her chest, as if the walls themselves were breathing. And then she saw it. There, in the center of the room, stood the grand wooden table. But it was not just a table. It was an altar, covered in old symbols and strange markings that Sarah didn't recognize. They were carved into the wood, so intricate and ancient that they seemed to pulse with life. The symbols twisted and shifted as though they were alive, moving before her very eyes. The air around the table seemed to shimmer, and Sarah's head spun as the whispers returned, louder now, more urgent. "You are chosen, Sarah. You are part of the awakening. The mansion has waited for you." Her breath hitched and she staggered back, her hands shaking as she tried to steady herself. The whispers filled her mind again, relentless, overwhelming. They were all around her, inside her, speaking words she could barely comprehend. And then from the shadows, a figure stepped forward. It was Claire, but not the Claire Sarah had met earlier. This Claire was different, darker, more ethereal. Her eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and her skin seemed to shimmer as though she was no longer fully present in the physical world. She smiled at Sarah, but it wasn't a kind smile. It was cold, filled with a deep, ancient knowledge. "You're too late," Claire said softly, her voice echoing unnaturally. "The mansion is waking. It will claim you as it claimed all the others. You cannot escape." Sarah took a step back, heart pounding. "What do you mean, I won't?" But Claire's expression shifted. Her smile faded into something more knowing, almost pitying. "You think you can resist? You've been brought here for a reason. This is not a game. The mansion feeds on those who enter, and once you've crossed its threshold, you are part of it, whether you want to be or not." The ground beneath Sarah's feet seemed to tremble, and she felt her knees go weak. The room was alive with an energy she couldn't escape, as though every stone, every inch of the mansion was pulsing with power. The figure of Claire moved closer, her form flickering and shifting like smoke. "The mansion has awoken, Sarah, and so have you." As the words left Claire's lips, the room began to darken, the shadows deepening, creeping across the floor. The firelight in the hearth flickered wildly, casting eerie, twisting shapes across the walls. The mansion had come alive, and Sarah was its newest prisoner. The mansion trembled beneath Sarah's feet, as though the very foundations of Ravenswood were alive, breathing in sync with the ancient energy that pulsed through its walls. The shadows in the room deepened, pressing in around her, thickening like a tangible fog. Claire, still flickering with an unnatural glow, stepped back, her expression shifting between sorrow and dark amusement. "You're bound to this place now," Claire whispered, her voice reverberating in the stillness of the room, so quiet yet laden with an overwhelming finality. "All of us are." Sarah felt a cold shiver run down her spine, and the weight of Claire's words pressed heavily against her chest. Her mind reeled, struggling to understand the implications of what Claire had just revealed. Bound to the mansion. What did that even mean? Before she could process the meaning of Claire's words, the room around her seemed to warp and shift. The walls began to close in, distorting like liquid glass. The ground beneath her feet cracked open, revealing a dark, chasm-like abyss stretching far below the mansion. It was as if the house itself was part of a living organism, something ancient, something that thrived on death, and now it had come to claim her. Claire's eyes locked onto Sarah's, filled with sorrowful understanding. "It's always been like this. The mansion traps us, feeds on us. It keeps us here in its grasp so it can regenerate. Each time it dies, it resurrects itself. But each cycle requires something, someone." A deep, guttural sound filled the air, as though the mansion itself was growling in hunger. Sarah's heart raced, her breath shallow and frantic as she backed away from Claire. She glanced around wildly, but the mansion seemed to be closing in on her, its architecture shifting like the corridors of a nightmare, growing ever more unfamiliar. "The curse is ancient," Claire continued, her voice trembling slightly now. "Each of us was brought here by the same force. Each of us is part of a cycle that predates everything you know. We cannot leave. We are bound to Ravenswood just as the mansion is bound to us." Sarah's legs felt weak and her vision blurred. She clutched at the walls for support, the reality of Claire's words sinking in. She wasn't just a guest here. She wasn't just someone who had stumbled upon a cursed place by chance. She was chosen. A surge of cold dread filled her body and Sarah's mind raced. "No, I can't." But Claire's eyes grew darker and her voice became sharper, like the sound of glass shattering. "You have to. There's no escaping it. The mansion's power will break you down until you're nothing, and then it will make you a part of it, forever." As if on cue, the mansion seemed to respond. The air around Sarah turned to ice, and the walls began to groan, echoing a deep, ominous hum that seemed to come from the very heart of the house. The floor beneath her feet vibrated with an eerie pulse, like the heartbeat of some giant, slumbering creature. It was alive. It was watching. Sarah could feel it, this undeniable presence that had always been there, lurking just beneath the surface. A force so ancient and so insidious that it transcended time and death itself. Ravenswood wasn't just a mansion. It was a living, breathing thing, and it needed her. Terror surged through her chest, and she felt the full weight of the curse press down on her, pulling her deeper into the mansion's clutches. The curse had claimed her. It had claimed them all. Claire stepped closer, her voice barely a whisper now, but her words burned with cold finality. "The mansion consumes us. We are its nourishment. The cycle is inevitable." Sarah's breath quickened as she took a step back, her mind racing for an escape, but the mansion's walls seemed to be closing in, narrowing like a trap around her. Claire continued, her tone now that of someone who had long ago accepted her fate. Every time we try to escape, the mansion pulls us back. The memories of our past lives, their deaths, become twisted like fragments of a broken mirror. We are bound to it, drawn to it, because it is our punishment and our rebirth. The realization hit Sarah like a physical blow. "You mean?" Her voice faltered. "You mean we have to die and then come back again, over and over?" Claire nodded, her expression grim. "Yes, that's the price we pay for being part of this cursed cycle. We die, we come back, and we're never truly free." Sarah staggered, her hands clutching at her throat, the overwhelming weight of Claire's revelation nearly suffocating her. "How do we break the cycle? Is there a way out?" She gasped, her voice cracking with desperation. Claire's eyes softened, and for a fleeting moment, Sarah saw the traces of humanity still lingering in her. "There is no way out. The mansion chooses us. It doesn't matter who you were before or who you were in your previous life. You are its prisoner now, just like the rest of us." The room seemed to pulse with the mansion's energy, the walls contracting, then expanding as though the house was breathing, taking in every moment of their conversation. The shadows shifted, and Sarah could feel the power of the curse creeping up her spine, like an invisible hand wrapping around her soul, tightening, pulling her deeper into the web of Ravenswood's grasp. Claire's voice grew faint, almost mournful. "We were once free like you, but Ravenswood, it takes, it keeps, it feeds on the living, and it never lets go." Sarah felt a sinking, suffocating sensation in her chest, and her heart began to race. She had thought she could leave. She had thought she could escape, but now the truth was undeniable. The mansion was her prison. It had always been her prison, and there was no escaping its endless cycle of death and rebirth. As she stood frozen, the mansion seemed to mock her, whispering in the shadows, its voice deep and resonant. "You are one of us now. You belong to me, forever." The walls of Ravenswood loomed over her, and in that moment Sarah knew that she was bound to the mansion's curse, trapped in an endless cycle of darkness, just like the others before her. The mansion had awoken, and it was hungry for her soul. The mansion around Sarah seemed to hum with a low, resonating sound, a chorus of whispers from the very walls that trapped her. The weight of Claire's revelation crushed her spirit, and her body felt heavy as if the air itself was pushing her down, weighing her thoughts. Her heart pounded against her ribcage, suffocating her. This place, Ravenswood, was alive, and it was hungry. Her eyes flickered around the decaying hallways, the once grand chandeliers now tarnished and hanging crookedly above her. The wood of the floors creaked beneath her weight, almost as if the house itself were groaning, aware of her presence and her every step. The realization that the mansion had been cursed for centuries, that it had consumed the lives of everyone who had ever entered its gates, was a burden too heavy to bear. The mansion was the curse, and it would continue forever unless someone made the ultimate sacrifice. The eerie silence that followed Claire's explanation was deafening. The oppressive atmosphere in the room made it feel as if the very air was alive, moving in waves that echoed through Sarah's mind. Her breath was shallow, and she clutched her chest, fighting the dizziness that threatened to overwhelm her. "There must always be a price," Claire's voice echoed, still soft but filled with the weight of despair. "The mansion cannot be destroyed without sacrifice, and it cannot be broken unless the blood of one of its prisoners is spilled." Sarah's gaze flickered back to Claire, searching for any hint of hope, any sign that perhaps she had been wrong, but all she saw was the empty resignation in her eyes. Claire had accepted her fate long ago. She had given herself to Ravenswood just as all the others had. Her mind raced. A sacrifice. It sounded impossible, unfathomable, but Claire's words rang true in the deepest recesses of her soul. There was no escaping Ravenswood. She had seen it in Claire's eyes, felt the suffocating weight of the curse press in on her. It was real, and it was hungry. Who must be sacrificed? Sarah finally whispered, her voice trembling though she fought to remain calm. She couldn't afford to lose control, not now, not when the truth was too much to bear. Claire stepped closer, her face now a mixture of sorrow and grim understanding. It must be one of us, a soul bound to the mansion, one who belongs to it, yet also fights against it. The words felt like cold needles piercing Sarah's skin. The mansion would only die if someone sacrificed themselves, a prisoner to Ravenswood, willing to give their life to destroy the entity. But who could make such a decision? Who could step into the darkness, knowing that their life would be lost in exchange for the freedom of the others? Sarah's stomach churned, her hands shaking as the reality of the decision loomed in front of her like a wall she could not climb. The mansion was alive. It had been feeding on them, using them for far too long. The curse would not end without a price, and she was the one who had to pay it. Tears blurred Sarah's vision as she turned toward the grand staircase. Her feet felt like lead as she walked toward the towering doors, her body betraying her resolve. She wanted to leave, to run, to scream, but deep down she knew there was no escape. Ravenswood would not let her go. She thought of her family, the ones she had left behind in the outside world. The thought of them, of her life beyond these walls, seemed like a distant dream. She had come here looking for answers, but instead she had found something much darker, something that no one could ever truly understand unless they had stepped inside these cursed halls. The whispers from the walls grew louder, as though the mansion itself was speaking to her, guiding her toward the inevitable. The choice was hers, and the weight of it was suffocating. There must always be a price. Her mind raced, and the memories of the faces she had seen here, Claire, the others who had become twisted echoes of themselves, flashed through her thoughts. They had all paid a price. Now it was her turn. Who will it be? It came to her in a sickening realization. There was only one person who could break the curse, and it was her. She was the one who had unknowingly become part of the cycle. She had been brought here for this very purpose. She had been chosen. With shaking hands, Sarah reached out and touched the cold, wooden door that led into the mansion's heart. The mansion responded, its pulse quickening beneath her fingertips. It knew it was waiting. Claire's voice broke the silence. "You're the one you always were." Sarah's stomach turned and a heavy weight settled in her chest. She understood now. To free the mansion, to end its reign of terror, she would have to make the sacrifice. She would have to become a part of the curse permanently. "I'm sorry," Claire whispered, but the sorrow in her voice wasn't for Sarah. It was for herself, for all of them who had been bound to Ravenswood, caught in its cycle of death and rebirth. The mansion trembled as Sarah stepped into the center of the room, her knees buckling beneath her. She had to make the decision. She had to give herself to Ravenswood in exchange for the destruction of the curse. A tear slid down her cheek as she closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the mansion's presence pressing against her. Her mind felt like it was drowning, but she knew what had to be done. And then, the mansion spoke to her, its voice low, familiar, as if it had always been inside her. "The price has been paid." The walls around her vibrated, and the shadows that had once been menacing seemed to pull back, receding into the darkness. The mansion had claimed her, but in the same breath it was dying. The curse is broken. The mansion's grip loosened as Sarah felt herself slip away. But as she did, there was no fear, only the overwhelming sense of peace that came from knowing the cycle was over. Ravenswood's hunger had been sated. Its curse had been broken. And now she could rest. The oppressive air of Ravenswood Mansion grew thicker with every passing moment. The walls seemed to breathe, as though the house itself was alive, anticipating what was about to unfold. Sarah stood at the center of the grand hall, her heartbeat echoing in the silence. The once beautiful mansion had become a dark, decaying relic, its very existence tethered to the curse that had plagued it for centuries. She had learned the truth, the horrifying truth, that the mansion wasn't just a place, but a living entity that fed on the souls of those trapped within it. And now it was up to her to break that cycle, to end the curse. But in doing so, she would have to make the hardest decision of her life. The moonlight filtered through the broken windows, casting long shadows across the room, and Sarah felt the weight of the mansion's history pressing down on her. She had come this far, survived the horrors that had been thrust upon her, and uncovered the mansion's darkest secrets. But now, standing on the precipice of the final act, she realized that she couldn't escape without paying a price. She turned slowly, the cold stone floor creaking beneath her feet, and faced the heart of the mansion, the center of its power, the source of the curse, the very thing that had kept Ravenswood alive for centuries. The dark, pulsating force of the mansion seemed to respond to her presence, drawing her in. It was as though it had been waiting for this moment, waiting for Sarah to come to this realization. The mansion knew what had to be done. The question was, would Sarah have the strength to follow through? Her mind raced as she recalled the cryptic words of the mansion's previous inhabitants, the whispers of the servants, and Claire's final confession. Someone must be sacrificed to break the curse. The mansion demands a life, a soul, to release its grip on this place. Sarah's stomach turned. She had thought she could destroy the mansion without any cost. She had hoped there was another way, but now it was clear there was no other choice. Someone had to die, and that someone would be her. The thought struck her like a physical blow, but she forced herself to focus. It was the only way. The only way to destroy the mansion and free everyone who had been trapped within its walls. The only way to ensure the curse would never spread again. But as the words echoed in her mind, a wave of fear washed over her. She had thought she was ready. She had prepared herself for this moment. But now that it was here, standing face to face with the truth, she couldn't deny the overwhelming fear coursing through her veins. Why me? She thought. Why does it have to be me? Her thoughts were interrupted by a low, guttural laugh that echoed through the hall. She froze, the sound reverberating through her very bones. It wasn't Claire's voice, nor the voice of any of the mansion's previous inhabitants. It was something else. A dark, twisted force that emanated from the walls themselves. "You know what must be done, Sarah," the voice said, its tone dripping with malice. "You cannot escape it. You are the key. You always were." The voice came from all directions, wrapping around her like a suffocating fog. She tried to move, but her legs felt heavy, as though the mansion was holding her in place. The shadows seemed to stretch and twist, clawing at her, as though trying to drag her into the very fabric of the mansion. "You have come so far," the voice continued, its laughter echoing like the sound of 1,000 tortured souls. "But in the end, the price will be paid. One must always make a sacrifice to end this cycle. It is the law of Ravenswood." Sarah's heart raced, and she fought against the overwhelming sense of dread that threatened to consume her. She could feel the mansion pushing against her, urging her to give in, to accept the inevitability of her fate. But she couldn't. She couldn't let the mansion win. Not after everything she had discovered. Not after the suffering she had endured. She refused to be the sacrifice. But then again, what other choice did she have? Tears welled up in her eyes, but she blinked them away, her resolve hardening with each passing second. She had to think of the others, the people who had been trapped here before her, who had suffered the same fate she now faced. She couldn't let their deaths be in vain. If I must be the one to break the curse, then I will do it. For them, for everyone who has come before me. Taking a deep breath, Sarah squared her shoulders and stepped forward, closer to the center of the room where the darkness pulsed with an unnatural life. The mansion trembled beneath her feet as if in response to her decision. She could feel it, the weight of history pressing down on her, the weight of all those who had been lost to Ravenswood. "I will not be your prisoner," Sarah said, her voice trembling but strong. "I will not let you win." The darkness recoiled, as if surprised by her defiance, but Sarah didn't back down. She had made her choice. She would sacrifice herself if it meant ending the curse once and for all. With a single, heart-wrenching cry, Sarah stepped into the heart of the darkness, her body swallowed by the blackness. The mansion seemed to howl with rage as she disappeared into its depths, but she did not feel fear. For the first time since her arrival, she felt peace. She knew that her death would break the curse. And so, Sarah's sacrifice was made. In that final, agonizing moment, the mansion trembled, and the curse that had plagued Ravenswood for so long began to unravel. The shadows dissolved, the dark energy receded, and the mansion, once filled with the echoes of lost souls, fell silent. Ravenswood was no more. The cycle of death and rebirth was finally broken. And Sarah, though lost to the mansion, had saved everyone. The mansion stood in silence, as if it were holding its breath, waiting for the moment it had been anticipating for centuries. Sarah's heart pounded as she stepped further into the heart of the Ravenswood mansion, the air thick with a heavy sense of inevitability. The dark forces that had twisted the mansion into an entity of pure malevolence seemed to be pressing in on her from all sides, their presence suffocating. The walls, once grand and filled with life, now seemed to pulse with an unsettling rhythm, a constant reminder of the evil that resided within them. The shadows seemed to stretch and twist, their forms indistinguishable from the dark corners of the mansion itself. The oppressive force behind the curse was closing in on her. Sarah could feel it, a tangible weight that pressed down on her chest, making it harder to breathe, to think, to move. But she refused to give in. She had come too far. She had learned the truth. She had uncovered the curse and its origins. But now she faced the ultimate challenge, to end it once and for all. The mansion had been alive with the souls of the lost for so long, feeding on the energy of its inhabitants, and Sarah knew that it wouldn't let her go without a fight. Its power had been growing stronger, feeding on her fear, and it would not relinquish its hold without exacting a price. A sudden crack of thunder echoed through the mansion, shaking the floor beneath Sarah's feet. The dark presence she had been trying to escape had materialized, its form no longer just a shadow. It was something more, something ancient, twisted by centuries of suffering. In the center of the grand hall, a figure emerged from the darkness, its form shifting like smoke, its eyes glowing with a malevolent light. Claire, the host of the ill-fated reunion, stood at the heart of it all. Her once warm smile had long since disappeared, replaced by a cold, calculating expression that betrayed the depth of the evil she had become. Her eyes, once full of life, now held nothing but the hunger of a being possessed by the mansion's curse. She stepped forward, her movements fluid but unnatural, as if she were no longer entirely human. "Sarah," Claire's voice echoed through the hall, the sound reverberating off the walls. "You should have never come here. The curse is not meant to be broken. It was made to last. We are bound to it. We are it. Sarah's heart raced, but she stood her ground, refusing to be intimidated. You fed on the lives of so many, Claire. All this darkness has to end. Claire's laugh echoed through the mansion, a sound that made Sarah's skin crawl. You think you can just destroy it. You think you can end the curse with a single act. You've seen what's become of me. You think you can just walk away and leave it all behind. I'm not running anymore, Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the terror that gripped her. And neither should you. You've let this place consume you, but I won't let it consume anyone else. The ground beneath Sarah's feet trembled, as if the mansion itself was responding to her words. The walls seemed to groan with an ancient fury, as if the mansion had awakened, fully aware of Sarah's intentions. The figure of Claire began to warp, her body shifting between flesh and shadow, growing taller and more menacing with each passing second. You cannot win, Claire said, her voice now a hiss, as her form began to change into something monstrous. The mansion will never allow it. The curse is eternal. It will always claim another. Sarah's breath caught in her throat, but she knew what she had to do. The sacrifice that had been foretold, the blood that had been spilled over the years, it all led to this moment. She was the key to breaking the cycle. She had known it from the moment she set foot in this cursed house. The mansion seemed to come alive around her, the walls warping, the shadows reaching out like hands trying to pull her in. The temperature dropped, and Sarah felt a coldness seep into her bones, threatening to freeze her in place. The mansion's dark force was pushing back, its grip tightening around her, but she had no time to hesitate. With a deep breath, Sarah reached out for the object she had discovered in the mansion's library. The ancient book, bound in dark leather, its pages yellowed with age. It was the key to breaking the curse. As she held it in her hands, she could feel the power of the mansion fighting against her, its dark energy pulsating like a heartbeat in the walls. Claire's monstrous form loomed in front of her, a twisted mockery of her former self. "It's too late, Sarah," she hissed. "You cannot destroy what has already claimed us." But Sarah did not waver. She lifted the book high above her head, her voice steady as she recited the incantation that would sever the mansion's hold on the world. The words flowed from her lips, ancient and foreign, but they carried a weight of truth and finality. As she spoke the last syllable, the entire mansion shook with a violent force, the walls cracking and groaning as if they were being torn apart. The shadows that had clung to the mansion's halls seemed to scream in agony, dissipating into the air like smoke. The dark figure of Claire let out an inhuman screech, her body writhing in agony as the curse began to unravel. "No," she screamed, "you cannot break it." But it was too late. With one final, deafening crash, the mansion's dark energy shattered, its hold on the world breaking apart. The once oppressive force that had plagued Ravenswood Mansion for centuries was gone, replaced by an overwhelming silence. The mansion itself seemed to sigh in relief as it crumbled, its walls falling away piece by piece, the oppressive darkness lifting. The air was clear, and the heavy weight that had been pressing on Sarah's chest since her arrival was finally gone. She had done it. She had broken the curse, but the cost had been high. As the dust settled, Sarah looked around, her eyes scanning the remnants of the mansion. Claire's form was gone, consumed by the very curse she had unleashed. The mansion, once a symbol of dark power, was now nothing more than rubble and ash. Sarah took a step forward, her heart heavy with the realization of what had been lost and what had been gained. The mansion was gone, but so were the lives that had been sacrificed to it. The souls that had been trapped here for so long were finally free. She didn't know what the future would hold, but she knew one thing for sure. Ravenswood Mansion was no more, and with its destruction, the curse that had haunted it for so long had finally come to an end. The air was thick with the scent of decay, the heavy silence that followed the collapse of Ravenswood Mansion. The once grand structure, now nothing more than a crumbling pile of rubble, seemed to breathe one final, exhausted sigh before it was engulfed in dust and shadow. The mansion had fallen, its walls fractured and collapsing into themselves, the ancient timbers groaning as they were devoured by the weight of the curse they had held for so long. Sarah stood amidst the wreckage, her legs unsteady as the ground beneath her trembled, as though the mansion itself was resisting its own death. The air was cold, the warmth of the mansion's twisted life force finally extinguished, and yet the aftermath of the battle felt raw and unnerving. The force that had sustained Ravenswood had dissipated, but the aftermath was far from over. Around her, the spirits of the lost souls, once bound to the mansion's will, began to stir. At first, it was a faint flicker, an ethereal light in the distance, a whisper carried by the wind. And then, like a floodgate bursting open, the spirits rushed forth, free from the chains that had held them for so long. The souls, twisted, sorrowful, and pale, emerged from the ruins, their forms flickering in and out of existence, caught between this world and the next. Some were figures of people Sarah had seen only in portraits, their faces once frozen in time, now animated with life and fear. Others were faceless shapes, remnants of those who had been lost to the curse so long ago. They reached out to Sarah, their eyes wide with desperate gratitude, but their touch was cold, their very presence unsettling. It was as if the mansion itself had been a prison, and now, for the first time in centuries, the doors had opened to release them. "Thank you," a voice whispered, barely audible. It was one of the souls, a woman with hollow eyes, her face a mask of sorrow. "You have freed us, but the price—" Her voice trailed off, her form flickering and then dissipating into the wind. Sarah's heart clenched as she realized the true cost of breaking the curse. The souls were free, but they were not at peace. They lingered, lost, their release only the first step in their journey to the afterlife. The mansion, once a home to dark forces, had also been a place of endless suffering, and now, with its collapse, that suffering had become Sarah's burden to bear. The ground beneath her feet began to shake again, more violently this time, as if the very foundation of the earth was being torn apart. The rubble shifted, the jagged edges of broken stone and timber groaning in protest. Sarah stumbled, her heart racing as she realized the magnitude of what she had done. She had freed the souls, but now the mansion's curse, its rage, had nowhere to go but inward. The destruction wasn't over. The wind howled as if in fury, the spirits of the lost souls swirling around her, their forms twisting and merging with the chaos that had once been the mansion. Sarah could feel their collective sorrow, their regret, and their anger, the emotions swirling around her like a storm. The price of their freedom was more than she had expected. It was not just the mansion that had to collapse, it was her. Why? Sarah whispered to herself as she sank to her knees, her hands clutching the earth beneath her, trying to steady herself against the force that was now pulling her down. The answer came not in words but in the oppressive weight of the curse, one last desperate act of vengeance from the mansion that had consumed so many. The spirits reached for her, their voices merging in a cacophony of grief and anger. They were grateful for their freedom, but their unfinished business, their endless torment, now sought an anchor. As the last remnants of the mansion crumbled, the earth below Sarah gave way. The ground fractured like the skin of an old wound, and she felt herself being pulled down into the very depths of the earth, dragged by the spirits, by the curse that had not been fully lifted. It wasn't just the mansion that had collapsed. It was the last vestiges of Sarah's world, her safety, her sense of control. She felt herself falling deeper, the weight of the spirits pressing down on her, their anguished cries filling the air. And then, just as suddenly, the pull stopped. The ground beneath her halted, as if the earth had decided she had reached her destination. Sarah gasped for air, struggling to stand, her body heavy as if she were trapped beneath the weight of the world itself. She looked around, seeing nothing but darkness, darkness that had once been part of the mansion, now creeping into the very core of her being. Her mind spun with the implications of what had happened. The mansion was gone, but its curse had been passed on to her. She was not free. The souls had been released, but they were still tied to the earth, to the land that had birthed them, and now so was she. Sarah had paid the ultimate price. She had broken the curse, but the cost was more than she could have imagined. Her thoughts were interrupted by a faint, echoing voice, barely audible against the growing darkness. It was a voice she had heard before, the voice of Claire, the host who had unknowingly led them into this nightmare. You're still here," Claire's voice whispered, her words twisting through the air like smoke. "You've broken the curse, Sarah, but the mansion's soul lives on in you now. You're the keeper of its story." Sarah's heart faltered. She was the keeper now. She had freed the souls, but they were trapped in her. The mansion's curse had passed into her blood, into her very being. She had destroyed Ravenswood, but it had become part of her, its darkness, its pain, its endless torment. And now she was bound to it. The sun rose slowly over the town of Ravenswood, casting a pale light on the remains of what had once been a thriving community. The mansion's destruction had left a permanent mark on the town, one that no amount of rebuilding could erase. Yet, despite the visible signs of recovery, the fresh paint on houses, the repaired roads, and the bustling shops, the air seemed thick with a sense of lingering dread. Sarah walked through the town, her eyes hollow, her steps dragging as though the weight of everything she had endured was now a permanent part of her. The townsfolk had begun to move forward, but Sarah felt as though she were stuck in the past. Ravenswood may have been gone, but the mansion's curse still clung to her, like a shadow she could never outrun. As she passed the town square, she could hear the laughter of children, the chatter of people enjoying the market stalls, but it all sounded muffled, as if she were listening through a veil. She caught sight of a young woman walking with her daughter, both of them smiling as they passed a group of men fixing the town's main street. Sarah's heart twisted. She was happy for the town, but she couldn't shake the fear that it wasn't really safe. Not for her, not for anyone. The darkness hadn't fully disappeared. It had simply taken a different form. The streets felt too bright, too alive, and the memories of the mansion's crumbling ruins haunted her every step. It wasn't just the walls of Ravenswood that had fallen. The spirits she had freed, the curses broken, they were still with her, lingering beneath the surface, even now that she was free. The true aftermath wasn't the visible rebuilding. It was the psychological toll the mansion had left on Sarah's soul. The nights were the hardest. Every evening, as she tried to sleep in the small, modest home she had rented after leaving the mansion's ruins behind, she could feel the pull of the spirits, their voices still whispering to her from the depths of the earth. She could almost hear Claire's voice calling her name as it had before. Sometimes, when the wind blew just right, she swore she could smell the musty scent of Ravenswood's rotting wood. She would wake up in a cold sweat, heart pounding, her mind racing with visions of the mansion, the endless corridors, the dark force that had consumed it all. She had tried everything to silence the memories: therapy, medication, even spiritual cleansing rituals, but nothing worked. The mansion's curse had become a part of her, a part of who she was now. She didn't know how to live without it. There was a hole inside of her, a void that she couldn't fill, and she was terrified it would never go away. The townspeople, too, were affected. They tried to go on with their lives, but the curse had left its mark on everyone, even if they didn't fully understand what had happened. Whispers followed Sarah wherever she went. Some were curious, some were afraid, and others simply looked at her as if she were a ghost herself. People didn't talk openly about the mansion anymore. It was as though the events had never truly happened, but Sarah knew better. She had seen it, lived through it, and she was paying the price for it. It wasn't just the townsfolk who had changed. The land, too, felt different. The forest that surrounded Ravenswood was now quiet, but not in the peaceful way Sarah had once known it. There was a stillness to it, a sense that something was waiting, watching, waiting to be awakened once more. Sarah couldn't help but think about the spirits she had freed. They may have been released, but they were still bound to this land, and perhaps bound to her. One day she found herself walking to the edge of the forest, where the mansion had once stood tall against the horizon. The trees grew thick now, and the underbrush had overtaken the old paths. The scent of pine filled the air, but there was an underlying metallic tang to it, like something was rotting just beneath the surface. As Sarah reached the place where the mansion had been, she closed her eyes, trying to block out the memories. "It's over. It's over," she told herself, but the words felt hollow. She felt a cold breeze, a sharp chill running up her spine, and before she could react, she heard something. A whisper, soft and familiar. The hair on the back of her neck stood up. She knew that voice. It was Claire's. "Sarah," the voice whispered, faint but clear. "You're still here, you're never truly free." The cold hit her like a wave, and Sarah staggered backward. Her breath caught in her throat, her pulse quickening. No, no, not again. She turned and fled, her legs carrying her faster than she thought possible, her heart racing, her mind screaming at her to get away. When she reached her house, she slammed the door shut, locking it behind her. She sank to the floor, gasping for breath, her hands trembling as she reached for her phone. But when she unlocked it, there were no messages, no missed calls, just an empty screen staring back at her. The wind outside picked up, the trees swaying ominously, their branches scraping against the windows as though they were reaching for her. She pressed her back against the door, her eyes darting around the room, waiting for something to happen. And then the phone vibrated in her hand. One new message. Sarah's heart skipped a beat as she opened it. It was a single sentence: "You can't escape." Her blood ran cold as the words echoed in her mind. The curse had followed her. She was never truly free. The mansion, the spirits, and the darkness they had left behind, they were still there, lingering, waiting to claim her once more. Years passed since the destruction of Ravenswood Mansion, and the scars it had left on Sarah's mind seemed to fade, at least on the surface. The town of Ravenswood had gradually healed, its people returning to their daily lives, rebuilding what had been lost. But as time went on, Sarah could feel the creeping unease within her, as though the very land itself had not forgotten the horrors of the past. It was on a bright spring morning, when the scent of freshly bloomed flowers filled the air and the birds sang cheerfully in the trees, that the first signs of the curse's return began to unfold. In the years that had passed, the mansion's ruins had become something of a local legend. The once towering stone structure that had housed unspeakable terror had been reduced to a pile of rubble. Yet over time, nature had begun to reclaim the land, with thick vines and moss covering what was left of the mansion's foundation. Few people dared to venture near the ruins, but life around the town had continued as normal. That was until the new family arrived. The Reed family, a young couple named Jack and Natalie, with their 2 children, Emma and Ethan, moved into a modest home on the outskirts of Ravenswood. They had come looking for a fresh start, drawn by the picturesque charm of the town and the peaceful countryside. To them, Ravenswood was nothing more than a sleepy little town, a place where they could raise their children in a safe, quiet environment. Little did they know, the land they had chosen to build their lives upon was steeped in dark history, and the curse of Ravenswood had not yet been fully broken. The Reed's home was located near the edge of the forest, just a short walk from the ruins of Ravenswood Mansion. Jack, being an avid outdoorsman, enjoyed exploring the area around their property, and one weekend, he decided to venture deeper into the woods, hoping to find an old trail. It wasn't long before he stumbled upon the overgrown remnants of a path leading toward the ruins. Intrigued, he followed it, unknowingly treading on the very ground where Sarah had fought to break the curse all those years ago. As Jack made his way through the trees, he could feel a strange stillness in the air, as though the forest was holding its breath. The birds had stopped chirping, and the usual sounds of nature seemed muffled. When he reached the ruins, he was struck by the eerie silence that hung over the area. Despite the beauty of the surrounding forest, there was a palpable sense of unease here, a feeling that something was wrong, something old, dark, and powerful was waiting to be awakened. Curious but undeterred, Jack stepped closer to the crumbling stones, his boots crunching on the dry earth beneath his feet. He examined the remnants of the mansion, the overgrown vines curling around the cracked foundation, the shattered windows staring out like empty eyes. As he wandered deeper into the ruins, he found something strange, a worn, yellowed book half buried under a pile of rubble. He bent down to retrieve it, brushing away the dirt and leaves, and found the cover to be intricately designed with symbols that seemed foreign and unsettling. The title, "The House That Never Sleeps," was written in an ancient, almost unreadable script. Jack felt a strange chill run through him as he held the book, but he dismissed it, thinking it was just an old relic of the past. He didn't realize that by picking up the book, he had unknowingly reawakened the evil that lay dormant within the ruins of Ravenswood. He returned home later that day, the book tucked under his arm, excited to show it to Natalie. They both laughed at the oddity of the find, not realizing that they had disturbed something much darker than they could have imagined. That night, as they settled into bed, the house seemed to creak and groan under the weight of the night. The wind whistled through the cracks in the walls, and the shadows in the corners of their rooms seemed to grow longer and darker. It was the first time since moving into the house that Natalie felt truly uneasy. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that something was waiting just beyond the edges of their consciousness. But Jack, ever the skeptic, reassured her that it was nothing, just the house settling. However, as the days passed, the strange occurrences became harder to ignore. The children began to complain of nightmares, dreams of dark, oppressive figures watching them through their windows at night. The family's dog, who had been perfectly calm before, began barking at nothing, her eyes wide and frantic, staring into the empty woods outside. The once peaceful house now felt oppressive, as if a weight hung in the air, pressing down on them. One evening, Natalie was cleaning the kitchen when she felt a cold draft sweep through the room, even though all the windows were closed. She turned to find the book that Jack had found on the counter, its pages fluttering as though being turned by an invisible hand. She picked it up, her fingers trembling, and read the words aloud, though she didn't know why. The book seemed to pull her in, its words growing louder in her mind with each page. And then the house went silent. The wind ceased, the dog stopped barking, and the eerie feeling of being watched intensified. Natalie felt a deep sense of dread wash over her as she realized the terrible truth. The curse of Ravenswood had returned, and the Reed family was now its next victims. The spirits that had once been trapped within the mansion's walls began to stir, their whispers growing louder, calling out to those who had awakened the evil. Jack and Natalie didn't know it yet, but they had sealed their fate by stepping onto the land of Ravenswood, and the mansion was already pulling them into its dark embrace. As the days wore on, the family found themselves drawn to the ruins more and more. The once beautiful forest surrounding the mansion began to feel like a maze, its trees and foliage closing in on them. The sense of isolation grew stronger, and the world outside the forest seemed to disappear. And then, one morning, the entire town of Ravenswood woke up to an unsettling sight. The ruins of Ravenswood Mansion, which had once been nothing more than a pile of rubble, were now standing tall once again, its shadow looming over the town. It was as if the mansion had been restored, its dark history waiting to repeat itself once more. The cycle had begun again, and this time no one would be spared.